Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good weekend and welcome back to Assassin's Creed Valhalla with the mighty Jingles. Not quite as mighty as I might like to think I am. I'd like to begin today's video with a cautionary tale. Here I am, sailing down the river in my jet-powered Viking longboat, looking for riches to raid and plunder, and there is a Saxon monastery just a couple of 100 metres east down the river from my settlement, which is located inside the county of Leicestershire, which has a recommended power rating of 20, and that's Leicestershire on the left hand side of the river. On the right hand side of the river is Grantbridgeshire, where we're currently questing, which also only has a recommended power rating of 20. A mere 750 metres or so east down the river from your starting settlement, however, is the county of Lincolnshire. And the county of Lincolnshire has a recommended power level of 160. So if, like me, you're just casually sailing down the river, less than a kilometre from your settlement, and you spot, I don't know, a Saxon monastery, ripe for the taking, and the game's even telling you, press E to raid. It's actively encouraging you to get out of the longship and crack some Saxon skulls. You're probably only going to realise the vast disparity in power levels the hard way. It's extremely likely that you'll first realise that something's going on when you attempt to dispatch your first Saxon spearman, and instead of just coughing, gurgling, choking on his own blood and falling over dead, this happens. And you may rapidly start coming to the conclusion that something is not quite right. Now, if, like me, you're dumb enough to not take the hint the first time and assume that, oh, it's probably just me, and rally the troops to have another go, you shouldn't be too surprised if pretty much more or less exactly the same thing happens. And pretty much more or less exactly the same thing did happen. I mean, obviously, I have a power level of about 30. Everybody here has a power level of about 160. To be completely fair, the game does give you some clues, aside from, basically getting two-shotted, to indicate that you might be slightly out of your depth. If you have a look at the enemies here, you'll notice that there's a dirty, great big honking red skull at the beginning of their health bars, and to be completely fair, this is pretty much all on me. I really should have noticed this. It's not as if other games don't do the same thing to indicate enemies that are vastly out of your depth. World of Warcraft, for example, which I do play, also has the same mechanic. But I was killing them. And the fact that I was able to kill these guys definitely played a part in lulling me into a vastly misplaced and false sense of security. Because I did say that more or less exactly the same thing happened. And it wasn't exactly the same thing. It was in fact even worse. Do you remember the mercenaries in Assassin's Creed Odyssey? These are random bosses that wander around the world looking for a fight. They have a similar thing in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. They're called zealots. The difference in Valhalla is that in Odyssey, the mercenaries were at least vaguely similar in power to the area in which you encountered them. That is not the case. That is very definitely not the case here in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Do you see the helmet icon up ahead? Right there in the centre of the screen. That indicates the presence of a zealot. Now bear in mind, I'm already massively out of my depth because I'm power level 30-ish, and I'm busy fighting a bunch of power level 160 Saxon soldiers in a level 160 Saxon province. I also can't help but feel vaguely cheated here because I'm still managing to kill these people, but I'm only getting 10 experience per kill. Exactly the same amount of experience that I'd be getting if I was killing people who were the same power level as me. The zealot who's about to turn up, it would have been bad enough if he was only power level 160. But he's power level 220. So my chances of defeating this guy are about as good if not slightly worse, than Nigeria's chances of coming up with a diplomatic solution to the problems of the Middle East. I have to admit, I do find it more than a little bit ridiculous that there are such massive disparities in recommended power levels in the same area. And I'm not just talking about the fact that a power level 220 guy has just turned up in a power level 160 area, and in fact later on, when I'm in a power level 20 area, there's a power level 90 zealot. But also the fact that you can be sailing down a river, and on one side of the river it's all... Meanwhile, on the other side of the same river, like literally 20 metres away, it's all... So I guess what I'm saying here is pay attention to your map. When you're playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, if you're casually sailing down one of England's rivers in your jet-powered Viking longboat, don't just take the game's recommendation when you pass some place that looks ripe for the looting and plundering, and the game says, hey, you might want to press E to raid this place. Stop, take a look at your map. Don't end up like me. Anyway, after that cautionary tale, let's get on with the plot. It's time to investigate the second of Jarl Soma's 3 lieutenants. Birna. Remember, one of them, apparently, is a traitor.
Eivor, my muscle-banded friend. There's a nest of Wigmund's men just here. We're going to pick it clean.
Every last one.
The fewer lice in the bush, the less itchy the pussycat. That's how I see it.
Yes, she really just said, the fewer lice in the bush, the less itchy the pussy.
How did you come to join Soma's army?
I'd been in England for ages before Guthrum, Ivar, Ubba, smuggling under the eyes of Saxons and Danes alike. I lied, stole, had my nose broken. Life wasn't easy, but it taught me how to bear the pain. I just laughed it away. When Soma took me in, she saw more than a smuggler in me. I was useful to something greater than myself. Useful to her vision.
In a world where few saw you as worthy of trust, she's one who did.
Right. And I love that about her. I love everything about her.
You seem to bring life and spirit to this clan. Does Soma feel the same?
If I knew what was going on in another person's head, I'd find life dreadful and dull. But Soma seems to enjoy my company.
In what way?
Her own way. Just not in the way I'd like. Painful truths are easy to bear when you can laugh, you see. Delight in the face of suffering is an act of rebellion.
What do you think of Soma's other warriors? Galin and Leaf?
Oh, Leaf's got that raw animal pull. Every time I see him, I want him to climb me like a tree and nest in my armpits. He brays about being honorable, but I've never met a man of honor who starts a fire just to be praised for putting it out. And Galin, he broods like it's an art form. He's got this self-importance that is just so charming.
We could talk all day, but these Saxons may fly from their nest.
You and I should take a closer look. My men will hang back and come running if things go sideways.
Yeah, I'm not expecting Birna to slip up in conversation and let loose anything incriminating, because I just don't think she did it. I mean,
Fighting beside you should
there
bring
is
a thrill.
some evidence
Happy I
that
can
she's
see
up
it
to
close.
something,
Don't get too close.
because back at her
I might
home in
black your eye and
Grantbridge,
bruise your head.
she had her bags packed ready to leave,
You'd lose
which
your
does
elbow
look
before the
kind of
bruises
incriminating,
showed.
until you bear in mind that she's hopelessly in love with Soma. And I'm pretty sure that Jarl Soma does not feel the same way, which would explain why Birna was getting ready to pack her bags and leave. Plus, factor in the fact that of the 3 lieutenants, Birna, Galin and Leaf, Birna is the only one with a rock-solid alibi. Even if we take for granted that absolutely nobody other than Soma and her 3 lieutenants could possibly have noticed the massive and obvious escape tunnel leading into the middle of the longhouse, Birna was the only one of the 3 lieutenants who had the rock-solid alibi of being in the longhouse, getting shit-faced the entire night in front of dozens of witnesses, and could not possibly have been the one to lead the Saxons to the exit of the escape tunnel and thereby given them access to the town. So, no, I'm not expecting Berna to say anything incriminating. I don't believe she's guilty. The only thing she's guilty of is falling in love with her boss. And unfortunately for Berna, her boss does not feel the same way. And that, certainly, at least in my eyes, explains why she had her bags packed and was getting ready to leave Grantbridge.
More noise than Ragnarok's end, and these Saxons still don't see you.
Not everyone is so fox-eared as you.
More stupidity.
Also, I kind of like her. I like her attitude. I like her sense of humour. She's just a very likeable character, and I would be very disappointed if, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, she does turn out to be the traitor. Anyway, let's crack on with taking care of these Saxon troops. These are Wigmund's troops, by the way. You've probably heard his name mentioned. He was the guy who launched the surprise attack on Grantbridge and briefly forced Soma and the remnants of the Viking summer army out. He was the guy who originally was in charge of Grantbridge until the Vikings turned up, so you could argue that turnaround is fair play. But to be fair to the Vikings, Grantbridge was a shithole when Wigmund was in charge. When the Vikings kicked him out and took over, they invested a lot of time and money and effort into building the town up, and now it's a thriving town and a centre of commerce for the entire county. Something that Wigmund absolutely cannot claim credit for. And it might come as a fairly major surprise to a lot of people that the Vikings did actually do this. They didn't just pitch up in their longships raiding monasteries. I mean, they did that as well. But at this stage of history, the Vikings, mostly the Danes, have been living in England for generations. You could make the convincing argument that they have as much right to live here as the Angles and Saxons before them, who also were not native to the British Isles. The Angles and the Saxons were Germanic tribes. As in... oh wow, the fall killed him. Okay, fine. and again, hooray. A couple of hundred years later, the same thing was true of the Normans. Everybody just assumes that the Normans are French because they come from Normandy. But the Normans were to the French what the Angles, Saxons, and later the Danes were to the English. Viking invaders. The Normans originally came from Scandinavia. They quite liked the look of Normandy and decided they were going to have it. And there was very little that the French could do about it. The original inhabitants of the British Isles, the ones who were here when the Romans showed up, the actual Britons and the Picts in what is today Scotland north of Hadrian's Wall, in this phase of history there are still Britons living in the British Isles, but they've been pushed as far west as they can go by successive invasions and colonisations from mainland Europe. At this point in history, in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and in fact even today in modern Britain, the only places in the British mainland that are still inhabited by people who can say that they were the original British inhabitants of the island, the only people still living in the British mainland today who can honestly say that they can trace their history and culture all the way back to the original Briton inhabitants who were here when the Romans invaded, or the people of Wales, the people of Cornwall, and to an arguably lesser degree the people of Scotland. And I say to an arguably lesser degree the people of Scotland because, well, the clue's in the title. Scotland. Scotland gets its name from a Gaelic Irish tribe who invaded and settled the land north of Hadrian's Wall. This was an Irish tribe known as the Scotti, or perhaps Scottii. I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce it. I'm really not up to date with my Gaelic or Celtic pronunciation. The Picts were still up there, but they were culturally and politically dominated by the Irish Gaelic tribes who had settled western Scotland, and who gave their name to the country and people that we now call Scotland and the Scottish, or the Scots. The Romans never managed to conquer them. Instead, they just built a couple of walls and tried to, pretend they weren't there. The Vikings showed very little interest in conquering Scotland, presumably because it just reminded them too much of Norway. It's one of the reasons why they came to England in the first place. But England as a country has been invaded and colonised so many times. It's probably where we got the taste for it. First the Romans, and then a couple of hundred years later the Angles and the Saxons, once the Romans had quit. And then a couple of hundred years after that, it was the turn of the Scandinavians, originally and most numerously the Danes, but also the Norwegians and the Swedes and even some of the Finns. Although the one Anglo-Saxon kingdom of England that the Vikings could never take was Wessex, led by King Alfred, known as King Alfred the Great, because it was the one English Anglo-Saxon kingdom that the Vikings could never conquer. Wessex is in this game, by the way, and King Alfred is the guy in charge, so I'm very curious to see how Ubisoft handles that. But then, of course, a couple of hundred years later, you had probably the most famous invasion of the British Isles ever, the Norman Conquest in the year 1066, when the Viking settlers had been assimilated at that point into Anglo-Saxon culture, but the arrival of William the Conqueror from Normandy put an end to hundreds of years of Anglo-Saxon rule, and was the last time the British Isles were successfully invaded. Or at least that's what everybody's taught, but it's just not true. And I'm not talking about the French occupying the Isle of Wight during the Napoleonic Wars. That doesn't count. I'm not talking about Germany occupying the Channel Islands during World War II. That also doesn't count. In the year 1688, yep, less than 400 years ago, England was invaded and successfully conquered by, of all people, the Dutch. I don't know what they teach about the glorious revolution, as it came to be known, of 1688 in the Netherlands, but they don't teach it at all in Britain. Most British people to this day still erroneously believe that the last time the British Isles were successfully invaded and conquered was by William the Conqueror during the Norman Conquest in the year 1066. And it's just not true. The last people who were able to pull that off were the Dutch in the year 1688. Now, I'm definitely not going to attempt to explain the events that led to what became known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688, because it's massively complicated. All kinds of factors include, ooh, look, I've got a new ability, Russian Bash. That's nice. What does this do? You Russian Bash. Okay, fine. Well, I have a spare ability slot. We'll take it. But yes, getting back to the subject. Suffice to say, a whole bunch of stuff was going on. Massive period of political and religious upheaval, which led to William of Orange, who was a quite famous Dutch prince, sailing an invasion fleet up the River Thames, taking over, deposing King James II, and installing himself as King William III of England. And ironically, it ended up working out better for the British than it did for the Dutch, because a lot of very wealthy and influential Dutchmen decided that they wanted to come and live in England, and they took all of their money with them.
You fought very well, Vienna.
Is that how you flirt, Eivor?
Is that how I what?
Easy now, Drengir. I'll see you back in Grand Bridge.
Right, quest complete, Storm in Ravensburg. Like I said, I didn't expect to find out anything incriminating about Berna, because I just don't believe that Berna did anything incriminating. But yes, the Dutch invasion of Britain in the year 1688. It kind of followed the same pattern that all previous invasions took, with the exception of the Roman invasion in, was it 55 BC? I can't remember. The one that Caesar did. The Romans came, they saw, they conquered, and then after a couple of hundred years they buggered off back to Rome. Pretty much everybody else ended up staying and being assimilated, with the notable exceptions, as I mentioned earlier, of the Welsh, large sections of what's now modern-day Cornwall in the southwest of England, and arguably, at least, certain parts of Scotland, although inarguably to a much, much greater degree than the rest of England. Just as an example, I'm from the northeast of England. I come from the city of Newcastle upon Tyne, an area that is in Assassin's Creed Valhalla and is known as the Kingdom of Northumbria. And I've had a DNA test, and I'm 15% Norwegian and 5% Danish. It's like I said, the English are basically from everywhere. Well, everywhere in Western Europe. which isn't really everywhere, but you get the idea. What's the other 80%, Jingles? Anglo-Saxon, which is basically German. I'm about as English as Adolf Hitler. Well, even then, I mean, what is English? Because the word English comes from the Angles, and they were Germans. So in that respect, I suppose I'm about as English as anybody. I mean, I'm certainly as English as large parts of the English royalty, most of whom are German. So, the House of Windsor, the current British ruling royal family, were originally known as the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Germans, and they changed their name to Windsor as a result of anti-German sentiment during World War I. So I'm about as English, in fact I'm probably more English than my queen. I'm certainly more English than her husband because Prince Philip is Greek. I guess it's safe to say I'm about as English as anybody, because I'm at least 80% English, even though that 80% is actually, if you go back far enough,
You never mentioned.
German. Anyway, shall we get back to Grantbridge, because we've still got one of Soma's 3 lieutenants to investigate. That would be Leif, the shipbuilder.
For being out now?
Soma said I would find you here, Leif. What's your plan?
We're ridding the world of a priest who spouts praise for the Elderman and funnels tithes into Wigman's coffers. So the plan is this. We sneak in, gut the priest, and return to Soma. That will get Wigman steaming.
How did you come to join Soma's army?
We came to England together, sailing under Guthrum. The great summer army, the Saxons called us. When Guthrum left for Wessex, Soma stepped forward to lead. Something I would have liked to do myself.
What would you do if you were the Jarl of Grantbridge?
I would run the city my own way. I would not give Birna and Galen's opinions equal weight.
Do you not trust them?
I wouldn't say that. It's more. Birna's boots are stuck in the mud, and Galen's are in the sky. If death were bearing down upon us, I worry neither would have what it takes to carry us through.
You were there when Guthrum made Soma the steward of Grantbridge. How did that feel?
Good fortune for her. When Soma took hold, the silver started flowing and the people started dancing. She knows trade. I do wish I'd been bold enough to put myself forward, to take on the burden and honor of running a city. But that's beside the point. Soma is my Jarl's corner, and I'm her sworn man. No act of any god will change that.
As a master shipbuilder, what does your work require?
Patience and love. I know each of our vessels as a parent knows their child. But building ships needs silver too. The hard wood, the tough fabrics, the expensive paints. The yellow I use, for instance, that must be imported. A high price for a happy color. I'm certain that's why someone stole my paint some weeks ago. Blasted thief.
Good conversation, Leif. Now let's take down Wigman's man.
Too right, too right. Wigman's whelp awaits his reward.
Leif is the one of the 3 that I'm still not sure of. I mean, I'm suspicious of Galen, because of the 3 lieutenants, he's the only one who has no witnesses left alive who can account for his movements on the night of the surprise attack. Now, something that I did find out earlier, but which I haven't actually put into the video, was that the exit of the so-called secret tunnel that led into the longhouse in the middle of Grantbridge was marked with yellow paint to make it easier for the invaders to find the entrance. And Leif is the only person in Grantbridge who has a supply of yellow paint. And yes, before you say it, I know we're supposed to be sneaking in and assassinating this priest, but I didn't start it. Leif's troops did. Okay. Anyway, back to the subject of the investigation. You might think it more than a little suspicious and convenient that Leif just casually happened to mention the fact that his supply of yellow paint had been stolen some days before the attack. Because if you were guilty, and it's known that you're the only person in town with a couple of barrels of yellow paint handy, you might want to arrange some kind of explanation as to how somebody else might have gotten their hands on it, should it become known that the entrance to the escape tunnel had been marked with this yellow paint.
We're screwing that
So that could be seen as being just a little bit suspicious. At the same time, if you weren't Leaf, and you had been given the job of marking the entrance so that Wigman's troops could find it in the dark, you'd have to find the paint from somewhere, and who better to steal it from than the one person that everybody knows has a supply of paint for painting up his longships, and in the process, set him up quite conveniently to take the blame. So, the jury's still out as far as Leaf's concerned. In the meantime, we've got a priest to assassinate. Hang on a minute. I thought we got into trouble if we went around just killing priests and innocent civilians, because, well, I mean, I've raided a couple of monasteries. There he is. And every time a priest has accidentally gotten killed, and sometimes not quite so accidentally, the game's threatened to boot me back to my last save position. It turns out that killing priests is fine as long as they're priests that Ubisoft has decided needs to be killed. Oh, Ubisoft. We'll take the Book of Knowledge, though. Incendiary powder trap. Ooh. What's this? It's a ranged ability. So... So we're firing landmines out of our bow now, are we? Okay. Well, I don't have any ranged abilities yet, so I guess it will do. And it's actually an extremely useful ability, as we'll see later on, although possibly not in this video. Right, take all the stuff that's left lying around and then get out of the village and have a little parting chat with Leaf.
Well struck. We made short work of Wickman's man.
That we did. You've proven yourself an asset to us. I see you're back in Grantbridge.
Right, well, that's all as clear as mud. I mean, I've spoken to all three of them, but I still don't have any definitive evidence to prove guilt one way or the other. Except now I have to actually accuse one of them. And I don't actually know who did it, if in fact any of them did. I mean, I'm suspicious of Galen, but suspicion alone isn't enough.
Eivor, the plan worked. One of Wigman's captains caught him sniffing around Jarl Ponte. Remember, you don't need to kill him. Have fun. I'll be planning our next move in the Longhouse.
So this is my last chance. If this guy doesn't know who the traitor is, and if we can't get him to say, I'm out of luck.
Little boy, where is your daddy hiding?
Godless heathens. Grantbridge is a province of Lord Wigman of Walden. The city is rightfully his.
Poor soldier. Doesn't know what heathens do to men of God like him. Hasn't heard the stories, it seems.
We can educate him. Look at those ham hands. Could make a nice pair of gloves.
And his heart. A heart that beats in a lad like this? Feed a family of 6 for a week.
Let's cut his throat now and water the orchards with his blood.
Oh, sweet lord, no! He's on the Isle of Ely, Ealdorman Wigmund, in the monastery, I swear.
Thought that would take till the next morn. Let's tie him up and let him rot away.
Oh, fucking Dane half-wits! The Lord will smite you from this land, all of you! May God have mercy on...
Hang on a minute. Was that guy about to say something that Galen didn't want him to say?
That home-thieving snake might have cast a curse on us. I couldn't risk it.
Right.
Christians don't curse.
Well, that's my mind made up. I was suspicious of Galen
Wickman's on the
anyway,
Isle of Ely. I'll tell Soma what we've learned.
but he was suspiciously quick to shut that Saxon up before he said anything incriminating. That's just made my decision. Let's go and talk to Soma.
Come on, I need a challenger!
Eivor, what did Wigman's little man have to tell us?
Wickman is at the monastery on the Isle of Ely.
Hiding among the church mice. I'll need to plan our attack. But I won't face him while the traitor he commands is still under my roof. So what have you learned?
A local said they saw someone running from the outskirts of the city to the river, just before the attack.
Did they recognize the person?
No, they couldn't be seen through the fog. But whoever it was, they knew something bad was coming. Your secret tunnel had many footprints nearby, and its mouth was painted with a yellow mark. Whoever betrayed you, they did so by marking the tunnel entrance, then opening the way to let the Saxons in.
You've been thorough. Who is the traitor?
I'm going with Galen.
Garlin betrayed you.
Are you certain?
No, but yes. Except no, I'm not really sure. But fingers crossed.
This will be the hardest thing I have ever done. Stay close by me, Eivor. I will need you.
How do you plan to deal with this?
As a leader must. My family, my inner circle. Today we make sure what has happened to us will never happen again. We end Wigmund's life. But not all together. For you cannot survive the winter with a rat in your larder. Galen. You have betrayed me, Galen.
I haven't! Soma, you're the key to my life. You must lead me to my destiny. Carry me to the summit of victory.
Do not warp what is real with the stories you tell yourself. I have seen no signs of your destiny. What I have seen is my people slaughtered, my city befouled, and your delusions fueling the destruction. How dare you think your destiny, your greatness, outweighed all of ours?
Okay, well if it wasn't Galen before, it's definitely him now. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
He believed too much in fate, and not enough in us. Take him away.
I wonder what happens if I was wrong.
I feel as if I have torn off my own arm.
Wigmund deserves death, but killing him won't make your family whole again.
You think I don't know? This is for those who follow. To join me is to take an oath. To break it is to suffer.
Because, well, I mean, the evidence against him was pretty compelling, but it was by no means conclusive.
We make camp on the outskirts of the Isle of Ely. Join us there.
Well, I hope it was Galen, because if not, oops.
She carries the weight of leadership on one shoulder and the bonds of her people on the other. Now that she's lost one, she walks lopsided. It will take years of toil to rebuild those bonds with her people. Yet she is unburdened now. Lighter. She is a leader, not a friend, Eivor. Her mistake was thinking she could be both.
Odin's not wrong there. That is probably the number one downfall of anybody who gets promoted to a position of power or leadership over people who were previously their friends, because you can be a friend or you can be a leader. It is incredibly hard, if not outright impossible, to be both. But anyway, Galen was guilty. That's my story. And I'm sticking to it. And now, the only thing remaining to gain the loyalty of Grantbridgeshire is to kill off that snake Wigmund, who's holed up on the island of Ely. And that'll be coming up in the next episode. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you're all having a good weekend, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.